Hi everybody, welcome back to another tips video. Now I am busy making some maxi skirts for myself that I want to wear with my boots when we go into colder weather. And as always, when I'm starting to sew, I start thinking maybe I must just share with you how I do certain things. So today's video is really all about how do I finish my waist when I am going to sew in elastic. There's different ways out there. I'm sure you guys have already seen some of the methods out there. Maybe you've seen the way that I do it, but for me it is really what is comfortable for me. That is how I decide what I'm going to do. And I don't personally like to do a band or a casing and then pull the elastic through it. I don't like that excessive fabric that I have then on the waist area. And again, that's my preference for what I like on my body. So the method that I'm doing is really to eliminate that excess fabric, to not see that extra line on the waist area. It really looks for me, if I finish it this when I do it sometimes with my knit pants and with my skirts as well, it almost looks like a normal woven finish that we would usually do, where we would do our darts and we would also go and do a zip. So just follow along and maybe try it and see what you think of this method. I'm going to take you through the steps of my changes I did to my pattern. Now I've just got the top part here because that is really where I made my changes. It was on the waist area. Now this pattern that I'm making, or the skirt that I'm making, is in a stretch fabric. This is a scuba crepe. It's got a beautiful feel to it, and it is actually really stable. If I pull it, the recovery is perfect. And also if I'm going to my 10 centimeters and I just stretch it, for me it feels like a comfortable 30%. As soon as I go more, I can force it more, but then I'm starting to really distort my fabric. So I would say a comfortable 30%. And then also, if you keep looking at this, let me just show you, look at that recovery. It's beautiful. So I know this is perfect for bottom weight. When I'm sitting, I'm not going to get bubbles on the back of my pattern where I was sitting down, or the back of my panel. Now, things that I consider is really, how am I going to finish the waist area? Am I going to be doing a band? Am I going to do a zip? Am I going to do elastic? So that is how I start looking at it. And I know when I work with these knits, I don't want to put a zip in. For me, the easiest really is to go and do my waist with an elastic. So there's a couple of things that I then consider. I'm not someone that will do an extra band that I'm going to sew on. I'm also not someone that when I've added on the amount for my elastic and I fold it into the bottom, I'm not someone that's going to sew it down and then again feed the elastic through. So I want to show you, really, this video started out just to show you my finish, but now I'm talking to you about my pattern changes as well. So the first thing that I considered is how wide is my elastic. Now this one that I'm using, I love this one for my waistbands. It is 3 centimeters. Usually you also get a 2.5 centimeter, which is 1 inch, which also works perfectly, but I just love this specific elastic that I keep in stock because it really doesn't curl whatsoever. So I know it's 3 centimeters, and I know I want to do a cut on for myself because I'm not going to do a separate waistband. I just want to cut on so that I can fold it under. Now my cut on that I'm going to add, I've got to do the width of the elastic and I've got to add seam allowance. Now my seam allowance that I add when I work with my elastics is only 6 millimeters because I go to my overlocker and I finish it. So I don't need the full 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. So all I do really, and I'm just going to do it with the elastic here just to show you, that is really the width that I need. And if I go measure it, it is 3 centimeters. So I know I'm going to add on my 3 centimeters. I just don't want to bring my head into the camera view, so it's easier for me to actually just go and do this. So that is the first step. I start adding on, and then I can go ahead and I'm just drawing a line. You'll also notice I just keep a straight line because I'm in any way putting an elastic which has got a straight edge. Now the next thing that I do as well is I keep my darts in. I do like my darts even if I just work half a dart, because of my difference in my circumference from the waist to the hip. if I don't remove extra here on the waist area, all that excess fabric is sitting on the waist. So I always make sure that I remove that extra fabric. And remember, it's a stretch fabric. I've got a stretch elastic as well. I can stretch it over my hips when I'm going to put it on. So I know the next step that I'm going to do is I want just to do half a dot for now. I might decide that I'm going to go to a full dot once I put it on my body. And that is, for me, an easy change that I can go and do, because I can just go sew a little bit more. I just want to do a half a dot, so I'm just going to go and draw my center line, and I'm just going to more or less just eye it, and that is what I'm going to do. So I know that that is the width of my dot that I'm going to sew in. As I said, if it's really depending on the fabric, again, I might decide to do the full dot, but I'm happy with doing just that on my front and on my back. That takes enough in, so I don't have that excess fabric. Now, the next thing that I've got to consider is also, remember, when we're sewing this dot, I have found that some people will sew this dot and they just carry on with this dot, and I'm just going to do a stipple line to show you. And that is then taking too much away on that edge for us. So some people will just go and carry on straight. I don't do that. So what I like to do, and I'm just going to change it this side so I can see what I'm doing when I'm folding. I just give it a little bit of a fold. I can see my lines. Can you see where that line is? I'm going to draw my solid line, because that is where it's got to be exactly the same width as what my skirt is going to be. So that is what my dot looks like. Can you see that section over there? So that is my dot that I will be sewing. And then the next thing, while I still have this folded as well, I just go and I give myself the shape of my side seam. And now you can see that this band that I'm going to fold under is going to match perfectly with whatever circumference I have on that section. If you don't do it this way, if I just carry it on again with this line, look at how much fabric I'm going to be short, and if I do it on the dot as well. So that means this part, when it's sitting on my body there, is going to be pulling. And I'm going to get it either wanting to pull the rest of the skirt up, or it's just going to make ugly puckers there. So that is my only changes that I've done. And then lastly, I just went and I added my seam allowance. Remember, if we're working with our Sherpa designs, we are working with our strip down pattern, and I go add my seam allowances afterwards. I just first went and did these changes. So I did my half a dot and I pressed it. Can you see my dot there? That is going to give me a lot of bulk on this area, and I'm going to feel it. So what I do when I am working with my dots, and I'm just going to show you, I've already prepared one, is that I go on that top section. I measure down until where the fold will be, and I just snipped my fabric. I open it up a bit and I just press it flat. The rest of my dot, I didn't go and open up. I just still pressed it to the center line. But now when I am folding this, I've got less bulk there. I can feel that I've actually spread that bulk. So that is things that I look at when I am sewing. Look at, is there going to be extra bulk? What can I do to actually reduce the bulk? So those are just my little steps that I go through. And then another thing that I wanted to just show you, when I do my elastic as well, I don't go and overlap my elastic. I don't like to do that, because then again I've got a lot of bulk on that area. So I always take an extra piece of fabric, and I've just got a piece of fabric here to show you, and I will put it down on the fabric and I will go and sew a straight stitch. I'll take my other section and I'll actually push it against there, and I'll go and do a little bit of a straight stitch there, and then I take my serpentine stitch and I will do my zigzag across just to make sure it's secure, and I cut away the excess of my fabric at the back. And if you look at that, it is really secure, and if we look at it this way, there is no added bulk. So I do all my elastics this way. Now if we look at my skirt, you can see that it's still given me this shape to go onto, or wider on the hip, and I've gone and reduced the excess on the waist. I've gone and I've pinned my elastic now, so you can see I'll still have to stretch it a little bit, but it's not going to be that excessive that I need to stretch. Now, another thing that I do want you to also be sure of, use a pin that you can really see your pins, because I'm working directly on my overlocker. I haven't gone to my sewing machine. Now, I'm specifically showing the overlocker because I do all my elastics on the overlocker. If you don't have an overlocker, you can always go and do a little bit of a serpentine stitch or your zigzag stitch on this area, because that is the only place where I'm going to actually sew the elastic to my skirt. Now, another thing that I do as well, if we start sewing, and I just wanted to show you this, can you see, because I'm going to be trimming away that seam allowance that I added, I can't just start sewing, because if I start on my overlocker, that means I'm going to form a little bit of a point, because I'm coming on skew and I'm going to go off skew. I don't want that. I want to move this fabric directly under my needle. So all I do for myself when I do anything in the round, I go and trim whatever my seam allowance will be that I'm going to be cutting off. I actually go and I trim it from the fabric. That way the blade won't be pushing up against my fabric. My next step is to now just lift my presser foot, and I'm just going to release my thread. So I turn the flywheel so that I turn it in a backwards motion, so that I can release my stitches. Now I can go and I can place my fabric under my sewing needles, and you will see there's my cutout that I've done. I just want to line everything up, and I can go ahead and I'm putting it under the needle. So my elastic is actually right against my blade. I don't want to cut the elastic, so please be aware that while you're sewing, you've got to make sure that you are keeping an eye on your elastic. I can see my elastic through this section, so I can see that it is next to my blade, but my blade won't be cutting it. And all I have to do now is just do a turn of this flywheel just to start forming my stitches, and now you'll see as I'm going to carry on, the blade will be cutting away as well. Sew at a slower speed now, because you're going to be sewing from pin to pin so that you can control the fabric. So all I'm going to do, you'll see I just pull my fabric so it's just lining up with the elastic. And I am keeping an eye there. I am not cutting my elastic whatsoever. Please again make sure that you don't go sew over your pins. So you've got to be aware of where your pins are. Takes a little bit getting used to doing it this way, but since I started doing my elastics this way, I will not go back to my sewing machine and try and sew it on my sewing machine. So you'll see I keep looking at where my fabric is, and I'll just give it a little bit of a tuck there so I know my seam allowance is correct. And if you're looking here, I am literally just cutting this off. There's no white coming from the elastic. We don't want to cut that elastic. So you'll see my hand is all the time controlling this elastic. I'm stretching here. This one, as I'm sewing, because I'm watching where the blade is, I am actually moving it if I'm scared I'm going to be cutting my elastic. I've got this last bit to sew, so I just want to show you what I do to finish this off. So I would go just past my stitches that where I started. I would go about 2.5 centimeters to 1 inch, but please be careful not to cut your thread that you've already sewn onto the elastic. So you've got to guide it next to the blade. If you are scared that you are going to cut it, you can always go and just move your blade out of the way. Let me just get my blade up. But please be careful now. You don't want the fabric to go past your bottom blade, because then you can pick up a little bit of issues as well. So all I'm going to do when I do sew that last little bit, I always keep my finger there so that my fabric pushes up against my finger. And I'm just going over that a little bit there. And again, I'm putting my needle down and I'm just pushing the fabric with the elastic so that I've got a 90-degree running there, and I sew off. And now if you look at my top where I actually sewed, you can see I've overlapped that little bit, so I know it's secure, and you'll see I don't have that little bit of a uneven line that we usually get if we just sew off the fabric. So another thing that I want you to look at, I did put in the beginning for you that you've got to sew with your longest stitch length, because look what happens as soon as I release it, it pulls back. And if my stitches were on the normal setting, it almost looks like the stitches are sitting on top of each other, which we don't want either. All I have to do now to finish my elastic is to just fold it under, and I'm making sure I'm folding it so that my elastic is really on the edge there. And wherever I've got my darts and my side seams, I am just going to pin my elastic down. And again, I will just do it there, and I'm going to pin it down. That is the areas where I'll now go to my sewing machine and I will go and stitch in the ditch. Now, stitch in the ditch is really when I'm sewing on that little section where I can see there's a seam over there. Can you see that? And I just sew right in there so that you don't see any of my stitches I'm going to that's going to be formed. And I don't sew it from the top to the bottom. I really just go and do a couple of stitches on that section so that it keeps the elastic flat. I don't want my elastic to be rolling out. And I only do it on those sections. So I've basically got the darts and my side seams. Now, if we also look at my skirt now, can you see between that section and there where I'm going to be stitching in the ditch, I've got a little bit of extra fabric. When I put it on my body and the elastic is stretching slightly on my body, can you see how it actually just folds it flat, or it takes away that excess fabric? So let me go and do my final stitches so that I can show you what my skirt looks like. Let's have a look now at what my finish looks like. So if we are looking at this, and I know it is difficult to see because it is a dark plum color, but I am also showing you the photo there. Can you see how smoothly it's hanging from the waist down? I don't have excess fabric on the waist that we would usually get if we are doing a little bit of a casing and we are putting that elastic in the casing. I just don't like that look that it gives me, and that is just a personal preference on my side. There's nothing wrong with doing it that way. We are all sewing for our bodies and we are doing what we prefer on our bodies. So that is just the look that I do like. And again, I do have my darts still in because I need that extra bit of shaping going from my low hip into my waist. It's purely because I've got a very big difference from low hip measurement to waist measurement. Now also look at the photo that I've shown you again. Can you see where the dart is? I'm just showing you that dart photo. You hardly see my stitch in the ditch that I've done. And that is really just, if you look at this, if I've got to just fold it over, can you see my elastic is sewn in on that section? So there is just no way that the elastic is going to show on the right side. It won't fold out again, and there's no chance of my elastic rolling that we sometimes get when we have done a casing for the elastic. Remember, there's always lots of different ways to do things, so you've got to find what's going to work with you, and this is just something that I thought I'll share with you. Now, if you're enjoying all these tips videos that I'm sharing with you, I'm going to ask you please subscribe to my channel. That way, when I'm loading my videos, you will get a notification so that you can go and have a look at all the tips that I'm sharing with you. You guys must have a lovely rest of the week. Get some me time in, get some sewing done, and just enjoy making clothes for yourself.